Be me 21 college student. Studying sociology, of course. Full-on card-carrying feminist. Went to the marches, ran a campus group, the whole 9 yards. My friends and I, we were convinced we had the world figured out. We read the books, we went to the seminars, we knew the terminology. Patriarchy, toxic masculinity, emotional labor. These weren't just concepts to us. They were the lens through which we saw everything. I remember this one afternoon, must have been early in the fall semester. Sitting in a lecture hall, the professor was talking about modern social dynamics, specifically the phenomenon of men, especially young men, disengaging from society. He was talking about them retreating into digital worlds, hobbies, and other self-contained ecosystems. A few people in the class offered up their theories. Economic anxiety, lack of community spaces, the usual stuff. I just sat there, shaking my head. It was so obvious to me. I raised my hand, and when the professor called on me, I laid out my thesis. It's escapism, simple as that. It's a conscious or subconscious refusal to take on adult responsibilities. Building a character in a game is easier than building a career. Earning digital currency is less daunting than managing real finances. Forming a guild or a clan requires less vulnerability than forming a genuine, lasting, romantic relationship. It's a flight from the duties that men have historically held: provider, partner, protector. They're running away because it's hard, and a fantasy world offers easy, meaningless rewards. I was pretty proud of that little speech. My friends gave me approving nods. The professor said it was a valid and compelling perspective. That afternoon, my 2 closest friends, Chloe and Maya, were buzzing about it over lunch. They thought I'd nailed it. Maya was complaining about her brother, who spent entire weekends painting little plastic miniatures for some tabletop war game. She talked about how he could list off 1,000 facts about a fictional universe, but couldn't remember to take out the trash. Chloe was nodding along, talking about guys on dating apps whose entire personality seemed to be which video games they played. It was then that the idea for my big semester paper solidified. I wasn't just going to state my theory. I was going to prove it. A case study. My living situation was perfect for it. My roommate, Sarah, had a long-term boyfriend named Nathan. Nathan was my subject A, the epitome of what I was critiquing. He wasn't a bad guy, I guess. He was quiet, polite, worked part-time, and was finishing his degree in computer science. But his real life, his passion, was this massive online role-playing game. When he wasn't in class or at work, he was at his desk with his headphones on, living in another world. His side of their room was a shrine to his hobbies: shelves with expensive-looking detailed character statues, posters of fantasy landscapes, a computer setup that looked like it could launch a space shuttle. Sarah didn't seem to mind, but I saw it as a massive red flag. He was physically present, but his mind was somewhere else entirely. He was a ghost in his own life. I needed a control group, though, a subject B, a man who was doing it right. And right on cue, fate delivered him. My friend Chloe had just started seeing a new guy, Dean. Dean was the polar opposite of Nathan. He was a business major, always well-dressed, incredibly outgoing. He was what we would call present. He was invested in the real world. From the moment they started dating, he was all in. He planned elaborate dates. He remembered little things Chloe mentioned and surprised her with them later. He was constantly focused on her and their burgeoning relationship. Chloe was over the moon. She'd show us the text he sent, the pictures from their dates. "See," I told Maya, "this is what it looks like when a man is actually engaged with reality." So, my project began. I started a dedicated journal, splitting it into 2 sections, The Escapist and The Realist. The first few weeks of observation went exactly as I'd predicted. My notes on Nathan were a chronicle of what I saw as wasted potential. Monday, spent at least 4 hours online after class. Loud cheers heard through the wall around 10 p.m. Apparently, they defeated some kind of raid boss, the grand achievement of the day. Wednesday, a package arrived. Another one of those statues. Watched him unbox it with the focus of a surgeon. He spent the next hour positioning it on his shelf under a little light. Saturday, turned down an invitation from Sarah to go to a party. Said his guild had a scheduled event. He chose pixels over people. I filled pages with this stuff, painting a picture of a man-child avoiding life. My notes on Dean, meanwhile, read like a romance novel. Tuesday, took Chloe to that new Italian place downtown, the one that's impossible to get a reservation for. She said the bill must have been astronomical. Friday, surprised her with tickets to a concert she'd mentioned wanting to see months ago. He'd remembered and bought them the day they went on sale. Sunday, spent the whole day with her, going to a farmer's market, a museum, and then making her dinner. He was investing his entire weekend into the relationship. It was perfect. The contrast was stark. One was pouring his resources, time, money, energy, into a digital void. The other was pouring them into a real, tangible human connection. My paper was practically writing itself. The first sign that something was off in my perfect theory came about a month in. It was subtle. I was in my room studying when I heard Nathan and Sarah talking. He was showing her something in his game, something he had just acquired after weeks of effort. A rare piece of armor or a weapon, I don't know. I was expecting her to be dismissive, but she wasn't. She sounded genuinely impressed. He explained the process, the challenge, the teamwork it involved, and his voice, it wasn't the voice of a disengaged slacker. It was calm, passionate, intelligent. He was describing a complex system with clear rules and measurable progress. He put in the work, followed the strategy with his team, and received the exact reward he was aiming for. He sounded satisfied, fulfilled even. It was a feeling of accomplishment, pure and simple. A couple of days later, I was with Chloe while she was getting ready for another date with Dean. She was showing me a beautiful necklace he'd bought her. It was delicate, silver, with a small gemstone. Must have cost a fortune. I told her it was gorgeous, and that Dean was amazing. She sort of shrugged, still looking at her reflection. She said it was sweet, but that she's more of a gold person, and he should know that by now. I was a little taken aback. It was a stunning gift. The criticism felt off, ungrateful, but I brushed it aside. Relationships are complicated. Maybe she was just having an off day. But then the patterns started to emerge. I would overhear Nathan and his guildmates on voice chat. They'd be strategizing for hours. Sometimes they'd fail, and they'd analyze what went wrong, adjust their approach, and try again. There was no blame game, no passive aggression. It was just a collective effort toward a shared, clear goal. When they succeeded, the celebration was genuine. They built each other up. They respected the skill and time each person invested. I started to realize that the social dynamics in his game were more functional and mature than many I'd seen in the real world. It was a meritocracy. Your value was based on your skill, your reliability, and your contribution to the team. Nothing else mattered. Meanwhile, the real-world romance I was documenting started to show its cracks. Dean was trying harder than ever. The dates became more extravagant, the gifts more expensive. He was clearly trying to hit a moving target of Chloe's happiness. And Chloe, she was enjoying the benefits, but her appreciation seemed to have a ceiling, and it was getting lower. She'd complained to me and Maya. One time, he booked a weekend trip for them to a little bed and breakfast by the coast, a grand romantic gesture. When she got back, I asked her how it was. She spent the first 5 minutes complaining that the weather was gloomy and that the B&B's Wi-Fi was slow. She barely mentioned the effort and expense Dean had gone to. It felt like his investments were yielding diminishing returns. For every unit of effort he put in, her validation decreased. The rules of the game he was playing were constantly changing, and he could never seem to score enough points. I remember one specific evening that really drove the point home. I was in the kitchen, and Nathan was there making a sandwich. We had one of our rare, brief conversations. I asked him what the appeal of his game was. I tried to sound genuinely curious, not judgmental like I felt. He thought for a moment, then explained it to me in the simplest terms. He said it was fair. He told me the game has a set of unbreakable rules. If you put in X amount of hours and complete Y tasks, you are guaranteed to get Z reward. The path to success is clear. There's no ambiguity. Your effort is directly and predictably proportional to your achievement. He said it's a world where the rules don't change based on someone's mood. It's consistent. I just nodded, pretending to process it, but my mind was racing. Later that night, Chloe called me, audibly upset. She was crying. Dean had done something wrong again. His crime? For their 1-month anniversary, he'd recreated their first date. He took her to the same coffee shop. They walked through the same park. It was thoughtful, sentimental. Chloe saw it as lazy, as a sign he was no longer putting in the effort. She felt he should have done something new, something bigger and better. She saw his sentimental gesture not as a sweet callback, but as a regression. He had failed to escalate. He had followed the rules as he understood them, recreating a cherished memory, and had been punished for it. The goalposts had been moved without him knowing. I sat in my room after that call, my journal open in front of me. The entries that once seemed so clear and damning now looked completely different. Nathan's world, the one I had labeled escapism, was starting to look like a logical, rational system, a system of clear inputs and predictable outputs, a place of order and fairness. Dean's world, the real world I had championed, was looking more and more like a chaotic, arbitrary, and profoundly unfair system. A game where the rules were invisible, the rewards were inconsistent, and the penalties for failure were emotionally and financially devastating. My confident thesis was crumbling, and I was starting to understand that Nathan wasn't running away from responsibility. He was just choosing to play a game that was actually fair. The next few weeks were a quiet blur of observation. I stopped writing in my journal with such definitive judgment. Instead, I just documented events, trying to be objective. My perspective had shifted from a prosecutor building a case to an anthropologist studying two different cultures. Culture A, Nathan's world, predictable, merit-based, collaborative. Culture B, Dean's world, unpredictable, emotion-based, transactional. I started paying more attention to the financial aspect, not in a spreadsheet, but just through casual observation. I saw that Nathan's hobby had a budget. He'd buy a new game or a subscription, maybe a collectible every couple of months. The costs were contained and predictable. It was a line item in his budget, just like groceries or gas. For his investment, he received hundreds of hours of entertainment and a robust social life with his online friends. Dean, on the other hand, was in a financial arms race against an invisible enemy. Chloe would mention offhandedly that she wanted to try that new fusion restaurant, and the next thing I knew, Dean was taking her there. Price wasn't a consideration. Her fleeting desires became his financial obligations. I saw him one day at the campus coffee shop, looking tiredly at his banking app on his phone. He had that stressed, hollowed-out look of someone watching their balance go the wrong way. He was trying to buy affection, and the price kept going up. The stock was volatile, and it only ever seemed to trend down. The climax of my little social experiment happened about 2.5 months into the semester. It wasn't one single event, but a series of them that occurred in rapid succession. First, there was Nathan. One evening, my roommate Sarah came into our room looking worried. Nathan had a big exam the next day, a final for a really difficult class. He'd been studying for weeks. That night was also the release of a huge, long-awaited expansion for his game. It was a massive event in his community, something his guild had been planning for months. I watched, expecting the escapist to do what escapists do, abandon his real-world responsibility for his digital fantasy. I was ready to write the final, damning entry in my journal, but he didn't. I heard him on his mic, telling his guildmates he couldn't make it for the launch. He explained he had a major exam and needed to be rested and prepared. There was no argument, no guilt-tripping. His friends just said, "Yeah, man, of course. Real life comes first. Crush that exam. We'll save some quests for you." They respected his decision. They understood that his real-world obligations took priority. The next morning, he left early, looking focused. He came back that afternoon looking relieved. Sarah told me he was confident he did well. He had managed his priorities perfectly. My theory of him being an irresponsible man-child was completely shattered. He wasn't escaping reality. He was balancing it with a hobby he enjoyed, and his community supported that balance. Then there was Dean. The very next weekend was Chloe's birthday. Dean had been planning it for over a month. He was under immense pressure to deliver an experience that was bigger and better than all the previous ones. He rented out a small, classy venue. He invited all of her friends. He ordered catering from her favorite restaurant. He bought her a designer handbag she'd been circling for weeks. The party was, by all accounts, a huge success. Everyone was having a great time. Chloe was the center of attention and seemed ecstatic. Dean was hovering nearby the whole night, looking exhausted but happy, like a general who had just won a difficult battle. He had put in a massive investment of time, energy, and what I could only assume was a terrifying amount of money. The fallout came 2 days later. I was in the library when Maya found me. She was fuming. She told me that Chloe had broken up with Dean. I was speechless. After that party, after everything he did, Maya explained the reasoning. Chloe felt the party was too much. She interpreted his grand gesture not as a sign of affection, but as a sign of insecurity. She said it felt performative, like he was trying too hard to impress her and her friends. She told him she needed someone who was more calm and confident, someone who didn't feel the need to make such extravagant displays. The rules had changed again. The very thing he was rewarded for in the beginning, grand gestures and overt effort, was now the cause for his dismissal. He had escalated his investment just as he'd been conditioned to do, and for that, his contract was terminated. I saw Dean on campus about a week after that. He looked like a ghost. He'd lost weight. He was walking with his head down, avoiding eye contact. I was with a mutual acquaintance, and Dean stopped to talk to him briefly. I couldn't help but overhear. He was talking about his finances. He'd maxed out 2 credit cards to pay for the relationship, especially that final birthday party. He was taking on extra shifts at his part-time job just to make the minimum payments. He'd invested everything he had into a system he was told was the right one. He played the game of modern dating according to the perceived rules, and his reward was debt and despair. He hadn't just lost a girlfriend. He was in a real, tangible financial hole. That night, I went back to my room and locked the door. I didn't open my journal. I didn't need to. The conclusion was unavoidable. I thought about Nathan. His world was one of clear cause and effect, of teamwork, of earned rewards, of a community that respected his real-life boundaries. He spent a little, and he got a lot of predictable, stable satisfaction in return. I thought about Dean. His world was a minefield of unwritten rules and shifting expectations, a place where his best efforts were reinterpreted as weaknesses, where emotional and financial investment led not to security, but to ruin. He spent a fortune and got nothing but pain in return. The great irony hit me like a physical blow. I had set out to prove that men who play video games were running from the real world, but the real world I was championing for relationships looked like a rigged game. It was a chaotic, punishing, and irrational system. Nathan hadn't chosen an escape. He had chosen sanity. He had opted out of a game designed for him to lose, and instead chose to participate in one where the rules were fair and his efforts were valued. It wasn't escapism. It was a rational, economic, and emotional decision. I opened my laptop and pulled up the draft of my sociology paper. The title was Escapism as a Dereliction of Masculine Duty, a Case Study. I stared at the words, and they felt childish, naive, arrogant. I highlighted all 15 pages of my meticulously crafted argument, and I hit the delete key. I felt a strange sense of relief, like I had just been freed from a heavy burden, the burden of my own certainty. A few days later, my friends asked me how the paper was coming along. I changed my topic, I said, offering no further explanation. They gave me confused looks, but I didn't care to elaborate. How could I explain that the entire worldview we'd built for ourselves was fundamentally flawed? That we were the ones who were seeing the world incorrectly? That evening, I sat at my desk, the glow of the monitor illuminating my face. I didn't open my school documents. Instead, I opened a web browser and navigated to an anonymous image board, a place for raw, unfiltered thoughts. I felt this compulsive need to articulate my findings, not for a grade, but for myself, to admit I was wrong. Former feminist ideologue thought I had men all figured out, believed guys who played games were just boys refusing to grow up. Running from real life, I decided to prove it. I watched one guy who poured his life into a game and another who poured his life into a girl. I expected to see the gamer fail at life and the other guy build a happy relationship. For months, I watched. I took notes. I waited for my theory to be proven right. What I saw was the complete opposite. I saw the gamer in a world with clear rules, fair rewards, and a supportive community that respected his real-world duties. I saw the other guy in a world with invisible rules, ever-shifting goalposts, and constant emotional and financial risk. One found satisfaction and respect for a modest, predictable investment. The other found debt and heartbreak for an ever-escalating, massive investment. They weren't running from reality. They were just choosing a better one. I was wrong, completely and totally wrong. It turns out the virtual world is more honest than the real one.